Hello, everyone. It's still morning in Brisbane, so good morning from Brisbane. And I'll just share my slides. So I'll take you through the presentation. Yeah. So bit about myself, although Roman has already mentioned everything about me, but I am an associate lecturer at the School of Management at Queensland University of Technology. So our aim today is that I will present the findings from my research study, my PhD study that I just completed last year. So this session is brought together with the support of Roman Rosbaki and Associates. And thanks to Roman once again and Adrian for helping me with providing this opportunity to present my findings to a broader audience. So as Roman already mentioned that yes, majority of the time what we researchers do, we collect data from the industry, we run the analysis, we publish academic papers, but those insights from our research don't always go back to the industry that helped us generate the data. So this session is a small step towards closing that loop while I will present my research findings. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your insights and experiences from practice. So it's more like opening up a conversation between research and practice. And if you want to reach out to me afterwards, this is my email address, and we will be sharing the slides. So please reach out to me if you want to share more insights or if you want to talk more about diversity and inclusion. So this research is part of I will be presenting the research findings from my PhD. The topic for my PhD was an investigation of women's representation in information technology. I did my PhD from School of Management at Queensland University of Technology under the supervision of Associate Professor Mohammed Ali and Erica French. Although this research is about women in IT and trying to understand gender diversity in IT, the findings will be very common for any other male-dominated industries, and I do research for other industries as well, like construction and project management, and I have seen similar patterns. So yes, the findings are generalizable, and you might have insights from any industry that you're working in at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to hear that from you. So I would like to start with the acknowledgement of traditional owners. The School of Management acknowledges the Turrbal and Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognize that these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. So this presentation today will move through several stages. I will start with the motivation, what motivated me into doing this research. I will then briefly talk about what I already read from the literature and where I positioned my research. And then I will talk about the 3 interconnected studies that I performed within my PhD. And I will conclude by highlighting the implications of the research, and which is where I really like to hear your insights and experiences. So when I was trying to understand what's happening with gender diversity in the IT industry, yes, I was looking at the academic literature to find out some research gaps and what I can do about it. But I also looked at what's happening in the real world. And when I was going through those information about what's actually happening out there in the real world, I came across some patterns and some facts, very interesting ones, and I really wanted to share them with you. So the first fact that I came across is women are 73% more likely to be injured in a car crash than men. Why? Are they being less capable of driving? Another fact, following the release of Apple's health app, the company was widely criticized for ignoring women's health issues. Again, why? Because these health apps are meant to be created and marketed for diverse group of people. Then why did that ignore women's health issues? Now, all these are a result of using products where the female population is an afterthought, if any thought at all. Now, in the IT industry, there is a phrase, shrink it and pink it. Not just in the IT industry, it is applicable to any product design industry. So if you know about it, you already know what that means, but it is a common phrase used in the product creation world for designing products for women. Women are too often left no choice but to use products that were designed by men for men, just scaled down and colored pink or some stereotypical feminine color. In the best case, it can be insulting. In the worst case, it can be deadly. So just imagine of the IT industry, an innovation-driven industry, always trying to decide on what next we will be launching, innovating new ideas and then launching products. So if there is no diverse representation of people who are making those decisions and also implementing those decisions, then we cannot expect them to represent the needs of the diverse group of customers. However, if we look at the stats, it tells us that globally, women hold only 26% of the tech workforce. In Australia, that percentage is 29%. The number starts going down when it reaches board seats and CEO roles, mainly where the decisions are made. So this shows that there is but research always shows us that if the teams are gender diverse, it increases creativity, better decision making, and also enhanced financial performance, especially in innovation-driven sectors like IT. But we're not having that at the moment. So when I was reading the literature, what did I come to know about the IT industry and gender diversity in the IT industry? So when I was reading the literature, I saw that the literature is identifying three broad categories of factors affecting this gender diversity in IT. There are structural factors, perceptual mechanisms, and cultural mechanisms. So one of the structural factors is the leaky pipeline. So people would say that we don't have many women applying for IT positions, and that is why we have underrepresentation of women in IT. And I cannot tell you how many times when I was trying to publish papers, I got these comments from the reviewers that what if it's a leaky pipeline issue? And my response every time is, if it is a leaky pipeline issue, if we are not getting enough women to apply for these IT positions, then that's not normal. There is something wrong in it. And there are research that conducted some cognitive tests regarding science subjects like mathematics among school children, and they did not find any cognitive knowledge difference in male and female students with regards to science and mathematics and subjects that are relevant and aligned with IT. And even then, we have underrepresentation of women in IT. Sometimes what happens when women they are interested in applying into those positions and they want to get hired in those positions, then another bias kicks in, another wave of stereotypes kick in, and that makes it again challenging for women who want to be in those roles, who want to get into those positions. And let's say once women can pass that hurdle and they get into those positions and they start working in the IT organizations, there are again so many other structural challenges with regards to training and development, with regards to career progression opportunities, that again creates challenging factors for women, and that creates a challenge for them moving up the career ladder. So there are challenges, there are problems at every stage for women in male-dominated industries, especially in IT. That's what the literature tells us. So what the literature did not focus on, the existing literature did not focus on, is that there are studies that looked at different policies, sometimes hiring policies, sometimes career progression policies, sometimes flexible working opportunities to enhance women's representation in the IT industry. But these policies do not work in isolation. They exist together in the organizations, and together they impact women's representation in any organization. So the literature looked at these policies in isolation, but I wanted to look at how the combinations of these policies impact women's representation in IT. Then the literature talks about hiring bias with regards to a global attitudes toward women. So if you possess not a positive attitude towards women, it is thought that you would have or a hiring manager would have a biased decision with regards to hiring women in certain specific positions. However, we do not look at context-specific biases. So it might be that we have a general diversity policy in place and we are very positive towards hiring women. But when it comes to specific contexts, specific roles, there could be unconscious biases that guide the decision making for hiring women into those roles. So I wanted to look into how the context specific situations or factors affect the hiring of women in historically male dominated positions. And then I looked into, yes, there is literature that looks into why women do not hold leadership, why there is very fewer women in leadership positions, but that looks into training and development opportunities or some career progression opportunities, but there is no specific literature on performance evaluations, which acts as a gateway mechanism to all these training and development and career progression and leadership opportunities. So I wanted to see whether there is any bias in those performance evaluations for women in male-dominated organizations such as IT. So my first study looked at the combinations of gender equality policies. So I have a question around this, and I really wanted to know your insights, but we can ask it later. So this study is all about understanding what combinations of policies work in enhancing women at two hierarchical levels, management and professionals. So what I did here, I looked at 5 higher order policies: hiring, development and performance management, career progression and retention, flexible working arrangements, and support for carers and paid parental leave. Why I'm saying them higher order, because if you talk about flexible working arrangements, it has many different types, such as it could be job sharing, it could be hybrid work, it could be remote work. So I included all those under the broader category of flexible working arrangements. So I collected this information from Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGA, which is where all the IT industries submit their reports on what policies they have with regards to gender equality. So I looked over the data for 7 years for 264 IT organizations. So I wanted to understand what combinations of these policies impact women's representation at the management and professional levels. So I have conducted the fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis, FSQCA, in trying to understand the combinations of policies. So I won't go through the details of this, but just a bit of a hint of what theory encouraged me into doing this. So I used signaling theory and complexity theory. So what this means is all these policies act as signals in an organization. So if there are these policies in the organization, they send out a signal that the organization is it has an inclusive culture, it has a commitment towards gender diversity. But the thing is, these policies do not send out like signals in isolation. They are there together, and together they send out signals about whether the organization is committed from hiring to retention for both existing and potential female employees. So if we look at the results at the management and professional roles, I would just like to draw your attention to two things here. The first thing is, if you look at these are the different parts or ways or different combinations of policies that lead to high representation of women at the management and professional levels. So two things. The first thing is, none of the parts have just one single policy that can affect this representation of women. Every time there is the combinations of policies that lead to women's or enhance women's representation. And the next thing is, it's not just one combination that leads to enhanced women's representation, but there will be multiple ways to achieve this outcome, which means that there is no one size fits all approach. So it all depends on the organizational context, and the organizations need to understand their specific context, the needs of their employees at different hierarchical levels. And based on that need, they have to combine their policies, and not just policy as a name there on the list, but also the practices, the combinations of those practices that will ensure that in their specific context, that was the need, and this is the combination that is meeting those needs for their employees. So we found those two things from, we could notice these two things, that there is no one size fits all approach, and it's never one single policy. But across these levels and across all these ways of achieving women's representation, one thing is very common, that is the flexible working opportunities. So across levels, flexible working arrangements emerged as a core condition, and that very much relates to how IT industry is, because IT industry is always defined as having long working hours, travel requirements, So, and constant visibility, that is what the literature says. So, flexible working arrangements really sends a signal to the women working in that industry, or to the female candidates who want to join this industry, that the organization is committed to work-life balance and inclusive workplace culture. So this helps women manage professional responsibilities alongside their disproportionate caregiving duties, and there's no denying of that fact. Still, women has disproportionate caregiving duties. So when the organization signals that we are okay with that, we are going to support you all through, that reduces turnover by reducing stress and enabling sustainable career paths for women. But it's not just flexible working arrangements that can achieve that high representation of women outcome. There has to be a combination of other policies. So suppose if an organization only has a gender equality hiring policy, hires women, but then there is no development and performance management opportunities in practice, then it is not going to retain women in the IT industry. If they are providing support for parental leave, but once someone is taking up those opportunities, it is then not providing any career progression opportunities for women taking up parental leave opportunities, then they might not get that scope to progress through their career. So the final takeaway from this study is that there is no one single way of achieving women's representation. It has to be an integrated approach, starting from hiring till retention, through career progression, development, and performance opportunities. And organizations need to understand their own specific context, understand what they need, and then create an integrated approach of policies that would ensure that they are recruiting and retaining women across hierarchical levels. So it has to be a comprehensive approach, not just highlighting one single approach. So while I looked at all these policies and how the presence of all these policies would lead to enhanced women's representation, what I found that the literature always talks about gender equality hiring policy, and how that would always, if that's in place, it would help. It would help having organization a balanced recruitment of both genders, even for like historically male-dominated roles. So what I then did is I looked at, again, I went back to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency reports. I looked at their reports over 8 years for, again, these 264 organizations. And I saw that over 8 years, 84% of IT employers had a gender equality hiring policy in place. So while 84% of IT employers are having a gender equality hiring policy in place, we still see a very low representation of women in IT roles. So why is that? So in order to answer that question, I moved on to my second study, which is where I conducted an experiment with two IT professionals working in Australian IT organizations to understand that whether there is any gender bias that operates in male-dominated occupational environments, emphasizing the critical role of contextual factors. So this study is guided by fit perceptions theory and role congruity theory that tell us that there can be biases and stereotypes regarding specific roles. And when candidates are applying for such roles, their gender can impact the fit perceptions for the specific role in the minds of the hiring managers, and that might impact the hiring decision. So, based on this assumption from the theories, I designed this study again for two hierarchical levels. I look not just hierarchical levels, two roles from two hierarchical levels. So I looked at the software engineering role, which has a very low representation of women, and then I looked at the chief technology officer role again, which has a very low representation of women. So I tried to understand whether these roles, because of how male dominated they are, affect the hiring intention and fit perceptions of the hiring managers based on the gender of the candidate applying for that position. So what I did here is, so I have the CTO role and the software engineering role. So I created resumes, two resumes for each of those roles. So two for the CTO role, two for the software engineering role. And I kept all the qualifications the same. There were no differences in the qualifications. But the only thing that I changed is the names of the candidates. So one name associated with a female gender, the other with a male gender. And I pre-tested that to see whether those represent that specific gender. So and then I did a randomized experiment where one participant only looked at one specific resume and tried to, and then I had scales to measure what are their preferences with regards to fit perceptions, whether they think that that specific candidate is fit for that specific role or not, and then how would they show their hiring intention for that specific candidate and for that specific role. So what do the results show? The first one is really interesting. So when we looked at the CTO role, there was no statistically significant difference between the male and the female candidate applying for the chief technology officer role. So there was a slight difference, but that was not statistically significant. So that was a very surprising result. However, when it was about the software engineering role, the experiment showed that female candidates were perceived as significantly less suitable for software engineering roles compared to identically qualified male candidates. And the literature also tells us, and the stats also tells us that we have only 5.2% of women in software engineering positions. So what happens is that these roles are historically male dominated. So when a hiring manager gets a female candidate and a male candidate applying for that specific position, because of that historical data, the hiring manager, or my participants representing the hiring managers, they thought of that female participant to be not competent enough for that very technical positions such as software engineering roles, and they thought of that female candidate as having less competence, being less fit for that position, and that impacted their hiring intention for the female candidates for that software engineering role. So what I also did is, and this is another interesting thing, what I also did is I tried to understand the generally expressed positive attitudes toward women. So what are the general attitudes toward women of these participants? And I used a global scale to measure whether in general these participants, my participants, had a positive attitudes or a slightly negative attitudes toward women. So the results tell us that the participants generally expressed positive attitudes toward women. It had a mean score of 3.47 on a 5-point scale, so above average, indicating relatively egalitarian views. However, these positive general attitudes did not prevent bias from emerging in evaluations of women for technical roles. So it just shows that this disconnect between general attitudes and specific behaviors highlights how context activated stereotypes can override conscious egalitarian beliefs. So if we think that we are committed to gender diversity, we are having a lot of diversity and inclusive policies in our office and in our workplace, and we don't hold any negative attitudes toward women. Even then, when these unconscious biases and historical stereotypes can influence hiring decisions when it comes to historically male-dominated roles, where we think that the attributes needed for this role are not associated with women. So that was the finding from my study. But with regards to the leadership expectations, what I argued is that because the leadership styles are changing, we're more going into transformational leadership styles, which requires servant or ethical leadership styles, which require more communal attributes, more empathetic attributes. We're focusing more on emotional intelligence when it comes to leadership. So those things now can guide the hiring of leaders. And then if a female candidate can present equivalent qualifications or very high qualifications for leadership roles, there is in my study, I did not see any bias in the at the screening stage. So there could be biases at the later stage, but at the screening stage, while screening resumes, there was no such biases identified. So that led me to think that if there are no biases at the screening stage when the female candidate is presenting equivalent qualifications and there is no statistical difference in the hiring intention or the fit perceptions for that role, then again, we see very low representation of women in the leadership position. So what could be the reason? So that led me to my third study, where I wanted to understand, because I wanted to look at that gateway mechanism, which is the performance review systems that is connected to all the career progression and development and performance opportunities. So I tried to see whether there are any biases in those performance reviews that might restrict the progression of women to leadership roles in IT. So, so this study was an interview-based study. I conducted interviews with 33 women working in IT organizations in Australia. So I wanted to understand their experience about performance reviews, or whether they have ever experienced biases in performance reviews or not. And then I conducted a thematic analysis of the findings that gave me some major themes. So this study is guided by the status characteristics theory that tells us that in male-dominated organizations, because the culture is very male-dominated, we hold men as having higher status in those organizations, and the opposite gender group, we tend to think of them as having lower status when it comes to competence and knowledge and taking hold of the technical projects in those organizations. So that guided this research, and the themes that emerged from analyzing the findings is basically there is different treatment of women in the male-dominated IT organizations. So the first sub-theme that emerged is the participants talked about what kind of performance review systems they have in place in the organization. Some talked about only subjective ones. Some talked about a mixture of some objective criteria and then subjective assessments. But what they all mentioned is that there is a lack of transparency for those measurement criteria. They do not understand the measurement criteria. The criteria are vague, so they don't know how well those criteria represent the tasks that they do all through. So it's not very clear and transparent. And imagine that in male-dominated organizations where women are already disadvantaged and the performance review criteria are lacks the criteria lack transparency and they're vague and not capturing the performance well, and the employees don't understand that well. There is every chance that subjectivity will creep in, and that would bias the performance reviews. So that is then related to another sub-theme, which is managerial discretion. So this sub-theme, the participants talked about how at the end of the day, it is the manager's final assessment of the performance reviews. And in male-dominated organizations, what they say that there is an existence of boys' club. And my participants also mentioned that a lot of performance reviews happen over drinks and over lunch, where men take men with them. And the women in these organizations, they feel excluded. They feel excluded from those networking privileges, and that ultimately guides a lot of subjective assessments. So again, women face that disadvantage in performance reviews. The other thing was the stereotypes that these male-dominated organizations hold against women, especially in IT. And we saw that pattern again and again, that women are not seen to be, or assumed to be, I would say perceived to be capable of doing technical jobs. They are thought of not having that technical knowledge and capability to lead critical technical projects. So most of the time, the responsibility of those projects go to maybe a male employee or a male member of the team. Even some of my participants experience that the client comes in and they look for a male member from the team with whom they can discuss these technical projects. So, and ultimately that gets reflected in the performance reviews. Another thing that they mentioned is the male-centric design of the performance reviews. A lot of the time, the KPIs or the performance criteria, they pick up the thing they do, or I'd say they do not pick up the things that these women do in the organizations. So my participants and all of them mentioned about this specific term called glue work, which is a very common term used in IT. So the glue work refers to tasks such as communication. So it could be maintaining communication with the team members, maintaining communication with other stakeholders, arranging events, doing a lot of mentoring. So women are always asked to do those tasks, but at the end of the day, they are not measured with the objective criteria that are installed in the male-centric performance review systems. But these women are investing a lot of time into doing this, but at the end of the day, they're not getting anything out of that when it comes to selecting women for the next step, moving up the career ladder. So that is not reflected. The other thing was the motherhood penalty that they talked about, because So I'll just mention one quote here, that one of the participants mentioned that I have to leave every day by 3:30 p.m., but I make sure that I complete all my tasks and then I leave at 3:30. But when it comes to performance reviews, visibility matters, and only someone who is there till 5 would be thought of being competent and hardworking and doing a lot of work compared to me, and then they get the better performance reviews. So there is this motherhood penalty in IT industries, and women are really if they're taking up a lot of flexible opportunities, they're really scared to go for leadership positions, because they just think that they're not capable of those positions, just because we're not defining them in that way. And then the last theme that emerged is backlash and double bind. So most of the time, majority of the time, the leadership positions are associated with attributes such as decisiveness, assertiveness, and every time we think about them, we associate them with attributes that are very much assigned to men. And if women try to show assertiveness or decisiveness, they experience a backlash. They are termed as being arrogant, and they are told to tone down their voices. But if they do that, they are thought of being soft and not capable for leadership positions. So there is this backlash and double bind. So the last thing that my findings tell is, so what? What happens? So I'll just read out a couple of quotes. The aftermath of that definitely took a hit on my mental health and my actual performance, because I started to doubt myself a lot more every time I did work. So what happens? The lack of proper evaluations does limit growth. It does limit other opportunities for learning and development. So the manager thinks that you're not ready to go through promotion. They won't put in the promotion package for you if they don't think that it's going to be successful. And ultimately, what happens, if not valued properly, women become frustrated. They eventually leave those organizations. And all of these participants, when I asked them that, so what's the solution to this? They just smiled and say, maybe I'll have to quit. So that again tells us or explains why we see such underrepresentation of women in these male-dominated organizations, especially also in leadership positions. So finally, what we can take away, it is that these three interconnected studies collectively show how gender inequality in IT is perpetuated through interconnected mechanisms. Fragmented policies fail to create inclusive environments. Biased hiring restricts entry to technical roles. Subjective evaluations limit advancement opportunities, and the resulting leadership gap reinforces stereotypes about women's capabilities in IT. And it becomes a never-ending cycle of women's underrepresentation in IT. So what we can do, a couple of practical implications that I derived from my findings, is that first, we have to move beyond tick box approaches. We cannot just have tick boxes regarding policies and just ticking off, we have those policies. We really have to look into our specific organizational context, understand what we need, and based on that, provide an integrated approach of policies and genuine practices in order to enhance women's representation in the male-dominated IT organizations. And I'm pretty sure that applies to any male-dominated organization. When it comes to hiring bias and performance reviews, as we have seen that even when people have a general positive attitude towards women, there might be context-specific biases that come into play when a specific action happens. So we need to provide targeted training. We need to provide targeted training for hiring. We need to provide targeted training for performance evaluations. It could be as simple as having a checklist. So when if I'm the hiring manager, if I'm going through some hiring decisions, if I have a checklist and if I see, okay, I have done that, that helps a lot. That sometimes helps a lot in fighting off unconscious biases. So we really need that targeted training in order to enhance women's representation. We need to dismantle the male-centric organizational cultures and structures that we have, make everything more transparent from hiring to career progression. And finally, what I would suggest is that we need to really genuinely raise awareness and empower employee voices. We really need to encourage our employees to speak about something if they feel that it's not right and it's going wrong. To talk about if they have experienced any discrimination. It should not be a grievance box filled with complaints never taken care of, but really look into those matters and take corrective actions if need be. So that's actually all from my side. And thank you for your attention. And I now would open the platform for anyone who would like to share their insights or if you have any questions. So thank you so much.